Hello, everyone. How is it going? Get in the chat now with your questions, your thoughts, whatever you want to discuss tonight. I'm no oracle. I'm no financial advisor. I'm not an expert by any means, but these live Q&As, a lot of you, I have great feedback from you on them, and are some of the most watched things that we actually do. So it's kind of crazy. I thought we'd start this off by actually going into the Wall Street report for March, because I never covered it on the channel. And this is only going to take like a few minutes whilst people get on the live stream here. So this is to do with the March data in the housing market. It's pretty interesting because I like this Wall Street report, because I think the guy, you can tell by the sarcastic title that the guy essentially probably shares my view on the housing market in Canada, that it is a ridiculous Ponzi scheme. And, to even refer to it like it's anything else is just kind of ridiculous. But anyways, let's see what happens. So the spring selling season is now in full swing in Canada. So sales of all types of homes rose by 1.4% in March from February, after the 1.4% increase in February from January. So on a year-over-year basis, sales plunged by only 34% from a year ago. So sales are down massively, and that's in March. So we had the first hike in March, I believe, last year. So and that tanked sales quite a lot, and it's unbelievable that prices actually started plunging just from one rate hike, and we're now at 4.5%. So the Canada Home Price Benchmark Index for single-family houses jumped by 2% in March from February, as it should during spring selling season. For example, in March 2017, it jumped 3.7%, and in March 2016, it jumped by 2.6%. There were Marches where it rose less, but it tends to rise sharply in March. And you can see what he's talking about there, because he's talking about 2017, because this was kind of like a correction, I guess you could say, in the housing market before it went absolutely bonkers, as Travis would say. But yeah, it is kind of crazy. So you can see that even in the context of like housing prices going down in a housing downturn, springtime is typically when housing prices are going to rise, if they are going to rise. So that's interesting. Compared to March last year, which was the peak, prices were down 17.5%, the second worst decline in the history of the data going back to 2005, behind only February's drop. So that just goes to show, that just doesn't seem like good things to me. In dollar terms, single-family home price index for Canada rose by $15,400 in March from February to $796,000 back where it had been in November, but on a year-over-year basis was still down by $169,500. Canada's housing market didn't reset during the financial crisis, unlike the US housing market, and after a small dip just kept ballooning. Been through many videos on why it exactly did that. And then it talks about how QT is continuing, and you can see how the assets are declining on the Bank of Canada's balance sheet. So it's very, very interesting. This was announced also, by the way, guys. I'll just pull this up. Was it today? Yeah, it was today. So Shopify stock soars as it abandons logistics strategy, cuts deeper into workforce. I mean, this is just how insane the stock market is, like a casino right now. It's like stocks are going up because the company is doing that bad that it's got to lay off 20% of its workforce. I mean, it is just absolutely baffling, but that's where we are today. So let me know. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, but some people actually left some questions on last night's video, so I thought we'd open with these. They weren't really, well, they were questions, I guess, but more discussion topics. So living paycheck to paycheck. Basically, somebody was talking about how they were living paycheck to paycheck and what they could do to kind of thrive in a recession, essentially? And I thought that was a fantastic question. And, I've been there living paycheck to paycheck many, many years ago. And quite frankly, it's a horrible place to be. And the first thing that I would say that you want to try and do, and it's way easier said than done, especially if you're living in Canada where your expenses are likely sky high, is to get out of that cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. And I know that, like I said, is easier said than done. But you got to think about it. There are a lot of businesses which you can do, and they don't require a large amount of capital to start, and they're in-demand services. There are things like snow clearing, lawn maintenance. Anybody can go out and learn that just from YouTube videos, market themselves, post the flyers, and actually earn decent money from doing things like that. And it's not just that either. There's also like cleaning. People want their homes cleaned. People want their dogs walked. And I know these are just some of the examples, but those are ways that you can kind of start a side hustle or because you can start small, right? You don't have to, it's not like you're going to have 100 clients to start. You're probably going to get 1 or 2 people. You start with them and then you work through referrals, and you're also earning money on the side. And the thing is, I always think that people have got to follow their passion, what they're passionate about doing. Because at the end of the day, if you're not passionate about it, you're not really going to stick to it. Macro is a real big passion of mine, and that's why I come here and make these YouTube videos. It's not for money, it's not for clicks, it's not for anything like that. It's just really because this is a huge passion of mine, and it's a big part of my life, and I believe it should be a big part of everybody's life, trying to understand this and work through this crazy macro world that we live in. Because quite frankly, when you really think about it, you need to know this stuff. Like, if you know this stuff, you're ahead of everybody else. I mean, and that brings me on to another question that somebody asked, which was, what are some leading indicators of a recession and what are some lagging indicators? And, lagging indicators for a recession, you're talking about unemployment, GDP growth, all the things that the central planners, the authoritarians, all the things that they focus on and look at, they look at all the lagging indicators. But, some of those things that are forward-looking indicators are things like the yield curve, incredibly predictive. Things like the bond market, what's happening in the bond market right now. Rates are being brought down right now. So, even though the Bank of Canada, even though the Fed hiked interest rates just yesterday by 25 points, the bond market is lowering rates. And, I talked about this it was a couple of years ago, I can't remember exactly what, but it was when the bond market was actually hiking rates before the Bank of Canada had even hiked rates. So it was kind of interesting when that happened, because it was getting more people to go into those variable rate mortgages, because the fixed rates were rising and people were like, oh, well, I'll just go into these variable rate mortgages. And now it's the complete flip-flop of that. We've got people going for fixed rates, banking on interest rates being better in a couple of years, which they might be. I'm not going to deny that I think interest rates are going to get cut at some point. Does that mean I think consumer prices are going to come down? No. But that's something that could happen. So interesting question. And then somebody else said, what am I investing in right now? And I'm investing in bonds. Mostly I'm in bonds, treasuries, and government of Alberta bonds as well. And, they're yielding really good returns. So I'm going to hold on to them and just wait for the stock market to crash, because that is a lagging indicator. The stock market is just completely out to lunch. And it is a lagging indicator. The stock market right now is not pricing in a recession. It's pricing in a soft landing. And we know, I think on this channel, that is it's not going to happen. There's not going to be a soft landing. So it's kind of crazy. It's going to be interesting because I'm flying out to the UK this weekend. I'm going to be there for a couple of weeks and spend some time with family. And I've also got to do some things. There's a conference that I'm going to be attending in London as well. I haven't been in London in years. And it's going to be really interesting going to London. I'm going to probably do a video outside of the Bank of England. But I've heard they post security there now to stop people doing videos. I mean, this is just how crazy it's gotten right now. You can't even go to these places and stand outside them because, so many people hate them. But I think it's a lot of the protests that are going on as well. But people are being destroyed in England. We think it's bad in Canada, but the UK, I mean, they got hit with massive inflation, like much, much greater than Canada. But having said that, I think a lot of that inflation was inflation that was held back for years and years and years, because Canada has been more kind of consistent inflation, even though, these past couple of years have been really high inflation. Canada's inflation has actually been pretty high anyways. Food prices have been going up a lot since I came here in 2016. And I was kind of always like, what the hell? Like how fast prices have rose. I mean, the crazy thing is, I can remember we would go to No Frills, like the discount grocery store, and we could get like a Minute Maid carton of orange juice for $2. And that is now like $6 in Superstore, which is just insane, or $5, something like that. It's more than doubled. So it's just kind of crazy. All right, let's get into the chat anyway. See what's going on. Where are we going? Claim refugee status in Barbados. Yeah, that's a great thing to do. I love you too, brother. Thank you. So no real questions in there. But, I'm going to take you over to this because I thought this was really interesting. I wanted to show you this because it kind of shows... Okay, here we go. So this is the US bond curve right now, the Treasury yield curve. So you look at this. So right now, you've got the 3-month Treasury, right? So you can see how the yield curve actually works. This is visually a good chart because it shows how interest rates go down on the longer term horizon. So you can see right now between 1 and 3 months, like the interest rates are actually up on the 3-month bill over the 1-month bill. So, maybe that means something is coming within the next 6 months, because you look out further than that and yields are just declining. And even the 1-month Treasury is at 4.5% right now, which is just crazy. That is, I mean, the Fed just hiked and it's at 4.5. It's like 75 basis points less than Fed funds right now. And that is used for collateral swaps. So that's why this is in such high demand. That is why people are taking negative returns on it over reverse repo, which is basically where banks park money. All right, let's go on to a different topic right now. So I'm going to share this. So this came out last year. And, we hear about all these, Canada is the best place to live in the world. All these best place to live in the world indexes that come out every year. And in my opinion, are just complete bullshit. They really are, because and when you actually dive into the back end of who's creating them, it comes back to like either extreme left or like World Economic Forum types that are behind these indexes, especially ones by like The Economist and all these other places, Time Magazine, and these are all the ones that you see displayed in the mainstream media, right? You never have seen this index displayed in the mainstream media. Why? Because this was actually voted by expats themselves. So Internations is actually a massive expat community all over the globe. I've gone to meetups with them before when we first came to Toronto. It's a huge network. And they basically ask people, they do surveys about what are the best places to live. And it will make you laugh what some of the top ones are and then some of the worst ones. So, and some of the top ones, even I didn't understand. So Mexico, number 1, okay? Mexico, number 1. When on any of these lefty indexes that come out where Canada ranks high, do you see Mexico on that list? Never, never, never. Yet you go chat to expats in Mexico and they are really happy with life and they wouldn't dream of coming back to Canada or the US. So it's kind of crazy. Indonesia, that's a weird one. Taiwan, I thought that was a weird one as well, considering everything that's going on there right now. Portugal, I've heard good things about Portugal. Lots of people going there. They've got a good visa program, I think, for digital nomads. Spain is also on there. Not really so much of a fan of Spain. UAE, Vietnam. And UAE is one that a lot of people rank highly, but again, it's kind of, from what I've heard anyway, I've never actually been there, but from what everyone tells me, it's mixed opinions when it comes to the UAE. Some people really like it, some people hate it, they think it's fake, and I don't really know because I haven't been there. So Vietnam, I've heard the cost of living there is real low. I believe David, I don't know if he's in the chat, probably not, but I think he lives in Vietnam and he follows this channel. He's from New Zealand. New Zealand's on the worst list. Thailand, I've heard that's a good one as well. Insanely low cost of living. Surprised Australia was on there, and Singapore is on there too, which is also classed as a good place to live, but you need a lot of money to go there. And then, interestingly enough, some of the worst places to go were Malta, which is kind of surprising actually, Italy, Turkey, South Africa, Japan, Luxembourg. I've actually been to Luxembourg. It's really nice. Luxembourg, I would call it. I don't even know. Cyprus, Hong Kong, New Zealand, and Kuwait. But isn't it funny how New Zealand ranks on there? You've also got Japan on there as well. And you've also got Italy on there, EU country, and obviously Cyprus and Malta, which... I've never actually been to Cyprus or Malta, so I can't say about what they're like. But I think it's really interesting how it compares to what the mainstream media is telling us, which is, Canada is a great place to live. Just don't go to your food bank. Did any of you, let me know in the chat, did any of you see the video that was posted on Twitter? I retweeted it earlier, of the line at the food bank. Because I honestly, I don't even know words to actually describe this. So let me share this. I mean, this is just nuts. Just look at this. And this is Canada right now. Like, that is just insane. So anyways, yeah, it's just kind of crazy what is going on out there, but it shows the desperation that is going on right now. People are really desperate and they're getting to the end of their tether, essentially. The funny thing is, when I think about food banks and everything like that, one thing that kind of annoys me about food banks is, I think anyways, unless to my knowledge any of them actually do verify people's income and everything like that, but they don't. They're generally just giving out food. But I think a lot of people are taking advantage of the food bank as well. 90% of the people that go to the food bank are great, probably, and need to get that food. But there are like the 10% of people, there are people driving there in like really flashy cars, and then they're going to get food from the food bank. And you could say, yeah, okay, well, they're going through bad times as well. But is it bad times because of their own doing? Because they bought a load of shit that they can't actually afford? Because, when you're dropping off food at the food bank or you're donating money to the food bank, you don't typically think of that. And I think they really should actually verify people's income, because especially in Toronto, I mean, you probably got all kinds of people that just do not deserve to get that help, and they're getting it anyway. And I know 90% of it is going to be good. 90% of the people going there need to get that food, but I just think and even those people, they would just be disgusted by people driving in with those type of cars and then taking away food. It's just kind of insane. And the same is happening in California. Actually, it was another YouTuber that called that out about a month ago when he was at one of them. So anyway, let's see what's in the comments here, if there's anything. Thanks, Gordon. I appreciate that. See you in El Salvador. What kind of impact would the US debt defaulting have on the Canadian housing market? It would have a massive impact, and I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think any of us should really think about that happening. But, if that happened, that would essentially just screw up the entire monetary system. I mean, treasuries, the debt notes, are essentially the lifeblood of the entire global monetary system. So if the US defaults, that would have massive impacts, massive impacts. So, you talk about credit tightening, nobody probably would be lending in that scenario, and people would have way bigger problems than worrying about the housing market at that point. And, interestingly, to take that thought along as well, is when you think about it right now, people are worrying about the housing market, but in a recession, in a true recession, when people start to lose their job and unemployment is one of the lagging indicators, what's going to happen? People aren't going to be worrying about housing at that point. They're going to be worrying about getting another job. A little bit of a personal story, but when I came out of high school, I just wanted to get a part-time job. I've been doing paper rounds 7 days a week for the entire time that I was at school. And I also had an after school job. So I made good money from that because I never got anything handed down from my parents because I don't come from a rich background. My parents were middle class. Well, I guess they're probably lower than middle class, really. But they were just average people, and they just didn't have money. Money was always tight. I was always told no, I couldn't have this. So I went out and I worked hard to get money. And then what happened was I went to college after school, and I'd had to give up those jobs. I couldn't do the paper round anymore because I was taking the train to go to college and everything like that. And at this time, it was like the worst job market you can ever imagine. And I know people can't understand this, but I've been through this. And, you could not even get a part-time job. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications for part-time jobs. It was just absolutely crazy. You would never get a response. That was a given. Nobody would ever respond to you when you're applying for jobs. But I'm kind of glad that happened in a way, because I've been made redundant twice, and really it helped me to actually find jobs really, really quickly. And, it's really simple, actually. You just got to kind of chunk the process and apply for like 20 jobs every single day. So every single day you just apply 20 jobs, 20 jobs, 20 jobs, 20 jobs. And, you create resumes that stand out compared to other people. I mean, back then I was actually handing out resumes, which it kind of sounds crazy to think about right now. But, my dad, he's basically in marketing, and he was really good with, he's just such a great marketer, really good at this sort of stuff. And he created me like a resume that was like a really long, it was really long. It wasn't like your normal standard size resume. So everybody was dropping off their resume into these places, and they would get mine, which would come in this bizarre shaped envelope. It would open up like a menu, and it was printed on like card. It was like really, really good. And I think that helped a lot as well. I actually got people that actually started replying after I did that, because when I just tried creating standard resumes, that didn't work. Now in the digital age, it's even more difficult to really stand apart, because like especially large corporations, they want you to do application forms, and then essentially what they get is just exactly the same on their end and there's no resumes, there's no chance to even be creative. But really, it's just the volume of jobs. And I don't think people understand that. I mean, I got really depressed during that time because I went from making money to nothing, to nothing. I could barely even afford lunch at college. Like my parents did not have a lot of money, and I knew that as well. I was conscious of that all the time, just because of my dad losing jobs whilst I was growing up and stuff. So, I was always conscious of that. And I knew I wouldn't even ask for it. I would never ask my mom for loads of money. And I hated asking her for money. But it was just kind of crazy. I would try and save the money that she would give me from lunch to college, and not, well, I just wouldn't eat lunch a lot of the time. Sometimes I'd make my own lunch. But yeah, it was just kind of crazy during that time because not being able to work is just kind of depressing, and not having money, not having income, it's not very good. And people just don't understand that job market. The job market was just a mess back then. It really was. And then I got into, I was in manufacturing. I worked at this company that made healthcare devices as an engineer there. And I was there for 2 years, I think. I did my apprenticeship in engineering, and that was a great job. I really enjoyed that. And it took me so long to get that job. And, even that job, hundreds of people applied for it. In fact, one of my friends applied for it as well. And I just managed to beat him out in the interview. But, I would rehearse the interviews and everything because I knew that if you got an interview, you do not want to screw it up because you didn't get many interviews during that time. And today, the job market is pretty, it's okay right now. It's starting to crack, obviously. But when you get into the depths of a recession, people are going to have to understand that, man, it is going to be just, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be really horrible for those that are unemployed. And what is going to be interesting is, are we going to get that fiscal response again from the government? And how big a fiscal response, how directed. I don't think it's going to be like 2020, but if it is, it's just going to be an absolute disaster. We'll just see inflation skyrocket again, and then rates go up along with it, and it'll just be incredibly volatile. But anyway, I don't know where I was kind of going with that story, but it was just to basically say that when the employment market, when the job market is bad, it is really, really bad. And I just think that people need to realize that these times can come. And a lot of people, they don't know that. They don't think that a job market can be that tough, that you can have so much competition even for part-time jobs. Anyway, I think I've spent a long enough time on that. Neighborhood cat lady, nice to see you in here. So what's it going to be, deflation or inflation? How impact food prices specifically? Yeah, so I don't think food prices are going to go down. I don't think that's going to happen. That's for sure. And in terms of deflation or inflation, it depends whether you're talking about the CPI or you're talking about consumer prices. But if you're talking about actual prices that we go into the economy and pay for stuff, it's not going to go down. The rate of increase is probably going to slow. The CPI could go into deflationary territory. That could happen, but that's not going to mean that the prices we're paying are actually going down by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it would be the case. And, it would, in a lot of a majority of the index of the CPI, well, not a majority, but a good chunk of the CPI is energy. I think it's around 30%, 20 or 30%. So if oil prices go down, if natural gas prices go down, that affects the CPI a lot. And when you figure what happened in 2020 with oil prices going negative, gas prices absolutely tanked. I mean, gosh, I can remember filling up for 59 cents and it never got that low again. But you can imagine the impact that had on the CPI at the time, and why the central planners were all worried about inflation, But deflation, sorry, not inflation. But in reality, were prices going down? No, no. I mean, on the one side of me, I'm like, they surely know what they're doing. And then on the other side of me, I'm like, they just can't know. They just must be going by their broken, stupid economic forecasts and models that they put out, because it just doesn't make any sense. But yeah, anyway, good question. Who's going to win the Alberta election, UCP or NDP? Oh man, I hope people wouldn't go into this. It's going to be really interesting what happens in the Alberta election. I think it's actually very important for Canada as a whole, not just for Alberta. I think the whole country is probably going to be paying attention to this election. The NDP have campaigned strong, and they've campaigned for years. They've been brainwashing people through YouTube ads. First of all, it was Jason Kenney, then it was Danielle Smith, and they've been doing this for a long time. So, and it's all misinformation. That's the funny thing. I mean, these are the people that argue we need to get rid of this misinformation, and they're the ones out there spewing it all. It's just kind of laughable. Politics aside, it's just a choice between bad and terrible in most cases. I mean, the UCP, they're no great party by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, Danielle Smith and the UCP have shot themselves in the foot, in my opinion, because they did this whole moving to Alberta campaign, which has been an interesting thing just to see how government propaganda works, because you did have migration spikes after they launched that campaign. I mean, it literally, it got to the point where the government was telling people to move, and all of a sudden people were like, yeah, let's go. I just couldn't believe it. So you can imagine the type of people that they're inspiring to move to Alberta are probably not going to be the type of people that are going to vote for the UCP. And considering they're more right than most parties in Canada, and where all these people are coming from, they're coming from BC and Ontario, and a lot of them are just going to one city in particular, and that's Calgary, and then Edmonton close behind that. So those are the battlegrounds typically for the election in Alberta. So I mean, they could have tipped the scales just by doing that campaign and importing a bunch of NDP voters. I really don't know. But I think it's going to be really close. I think it's going to be really close. I don't know which one's going to win. I hope it's the UCP, but, I fear it's going to be the NDP. And if that happens, I mean, that's just going to be a total disaster for this province and for Canada in general, because, I mean, the NDP, the provincial NDP are literally the same as the federal NDP. And we know who's running the show there. It's Jagmeet Singh. He is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. He is literally a World Economic Forum type. So we're going to see all the agenda pushed through from this World Economic Forum, which obviously isn't going to be good for a province like Alberta. So I don't know. I guess we just got to wait and see and hope. But yeah, it's going to be a disaster, I think. All right, I'm just thanks, Shay. I just saw your comment there. Haven't seen Canada in disarray in my lifetime. It's pathetic, Derek said. Best bang for the buck, Thailand. All right, let me try and get down to the bottom. The comments are always so lagging on the StreamYard. I've got them going on here, but I want to pull them up. Do you believe it's worth... All right, okay, this is a good one. Do you believe it's worth moving to Calgary or Edmonton, Alberta? Alberta is already affected with high prices and housing bubble. It's a good question. I mean, it depends where you come from. I don't think it is. In fact, I would actually argue in some cases, like, so if I was doing engineering in Canada right now, then I would probably move to Ontario. Why? Because you can get jobs. I've literally been getting emails for jobs in Ontario that are six figures, and you're living in towns like Windsor, where the cost of living is fairly close. I mean, it's not a great place to live. I've been to Windsor. The cost of living is comparable to probably a place like Calgary. You're right by Detroit. You can just pop across the border, access an international airport where you don't have to deal with the Canadian monopoly airline complete shit show that we have in Canada. And you're just more central. I mean, the thing that I don't like the most about Calgary is the weather, number one, and also the fact that it is so remote, like it's in the middle of nowhere. So to get or fly anywhere takes a significant amount of time, and you've got to fly in most cases, and that's going to cost you a lot of money in most cases. Whereas when we lived in Toronto, and then when we lived in Milton, we could just go to Buffalo Airport. We had the option of Detroit if we really wanted to drive far. We got Toronto, which is pretty much the best hub that you've got in Canada in terms of airports. But it really depends on what your priorities are and where you're living right now. It's such a hard question to answer that. But yeah, and it depends what you do for work as well. Job opportunities aren't that great in Alberta for what it's worth. A lot of people say they are. I don't really think so. There are energy industry jobs for sure, but those are always the first ones to go during a recession. I mean, they contract out a lot of work now so that they can just get rid of the people really easily. And in fact, I heard from one of my friends who said that they're starting to lay people off already in the energy sector. So, well, where he works anyway, which is up on the oil sands. So, I don't know. I mean, Alberta also has got one of the highest unemployment rates in Canada. So, especially Calgary. Calgary has the highest unemployment rate in Canada right now. So is that a good move to a place with the highest unemployment rate in Canada right now before a massive recession? And I just don't think that's a good move, in my opinion. And that's just me being straight. I mean, I'm going to be moving out of here. I'm going to be jetting. Those of you that have followed the channel for a long time, you'll know that we've been exploring other places and different places that we want to go and move. And, when we move, I'm still going to be doing these videos, much to the annoyance of the other realtors that probably criticize this channel and everything like that. I will continue to make the videos because macro, like I said, is a passion of mine. So I'll always be doing that. But, the funny thing is there are such better places to go move to. It just depends on what you do for work, whether you can make that remote. So, but there are opportunities out there. I mean, one of the easiest things that people can do and work remotely doing and get like credentials to do it as well, because that matters a lot, is English, like teaching English. If you've got any experience teaching English, pretty easy to get contracting work doing that online. There are also countries that will pay you good money to go do that, like in the UAE as well. So, and there's many, many countries that will pay you. Malaysia, and that's not a bad place to really move. Low cost of living, English is spoken well there. So, it depends what your priorities are, I guess. I mean, I just think Canada is heading off a cliff, and at some point in the future, it will get to a point of recovery. But right now, it's just going down and down and down. I mean, we saw the lines at the food bank, and that is the literal reality. I mean, you've got a government that is literally trying to, I mean, this Trudeau's doing the opposite of what the UCP has done in Alberta. he knows that by inviting lots of immigrants, he's importing voters, and they're going where? They're going to generally the battlegrounds as well for general elections. And, he's importing a lot of people that are poor and are going to earn a lot less income than the average Canadian. And that's just the facts. That's just what it is. So, unfortunately, a lot of the people that are at the food banks are immigrants, and it's no real fault of their own, because a lot of them are sold a complete lie, because there's all these unregulated immigration consultants in India, Mexico, all these other places that are advertising. I mean, we saw it even in Mexico, that like I was getting targeted ads on my phone, which was it was meant for like Mexican people, which was saying move to Canada. And it wasn't the government of Canada that was advertising. It was actually these immigration consultants. And they were basically saying, come to Canada, all these benefits, child benefit, free health care, all the rest of it. And it's like, these people, they don't understand how bad the system is and how high the cost of living is. Like if you live in Mexico, your cost of living is really low, and you probably think, wow, food prices, they're not going to be that much higher. And then you get to Canada and you're like, what? I mean, you can live so cheaply in a place like Mexico. I mean, if things really got tough for you, you could easily, for one person, just spend like 20 or 30 US dollars, and that would buy you a week's groceries, and you'd be okay with that, and you'd be getting lots of fresh fruits and vegetables as well. Whereas, in Canada, what are you going to get for 20 or 30 bucks? I mean, a loaf of bread now is like just ridiculous prices. It's just absolutely insane. It's going to be interesting to see what the prices are like in England, because apparently they're up about 30% since we were there last. So yeah, really interesting. And we're also heading to Panama next month. Just booked that last minute the other day because we got a really good deal on the flight. So we're going to check that out as well. Kind of went off on a long tangent there. I'm really sorry about that, guys. Just one single burger at A&W, $10. All right, let's see what else we got. Do you believe crash will happen? I'm not sure what you're talking about there, whether you're talking about real estate, but yes, I certainly do believe the crash is going to happen. I think the crash is likely going to happen by the end of this year. I think we're going to see the major liquidity event that's going to come. I mean, it's looking like the bonds and the yield curve is predicting that it's going to come around end of Q3 into Q4, possibly in Q4, even Q1 next year at the latest. But yeah, I do believe there's going to be a crash. I mean, everything is pointing towards that right now. The economy is deteriorating. It's slowing down fast. You're seeing CPI, and even though CPI inflation is a lagging indicator, you're seeing how fast that's coming down right now. And it's not good. It's not good at all. When you look at what people are going out and buying, they're cutting back right now. And, I was actually at a not a building company. It was a roofing company the other day. And the guy was actually saying, fair play to the guy, because, I don't think a lot of people are awake as this guy was, because he was saying how basically he's getting a lot of people ringing up now asking for work. And the last time that this happened was before like a recession, essentially. Now, it wasn't a recession that affected the whole of Canada. It was like the Alberta recession. But the whole of Canada nearly did tip into recession, and the whole global economy nearly tipped into recession. And then they cut rates a little bit. And really, it didn't do that much. And then it was looking likely that it was going to head into a recession in 2019. The yield curve inverted. And then we got 2020. So we were due that recession anyway, regardless of what happened in 2020. I just think it's kind of crazy when you consider that the yield curve inverted in, I think it was around the summer of 2019. And then that happened in 2020. I mean, nobody could have thought of that. But the yield curve is extremely inverted. Like, we're seeing all the bank collapses that are happening in the US right now. That doesn't seem like a sound monetary system. And it's not just in the US either. You've got problems that have happened with Credit Suisse. You've got all kinds of issues that are going on. So it's not just US bank stocks that are being hammered, is it? It's also the Canadian banks as well. In fact, if you look at the Canadian bank that's been hammered the worst, it's BMO, which is probably because they are one of the banks with the most amount of uninsured deposits. But even the government's come out and they've said, just like the US government, to try and calm things down, they've said that they're going to backstop. If necessary, they'll backstop all deposits. That was an article that I was planning on going into in another video maybe next week, because it's interesting that they're saying that, because how are they going to do that? Because I mean, where's the money going to come from for that? Is it going to come from the central bank? And the central bank's now just going to be the excuse instead of the government? They'll be used for everything. I don't know. So yeah, Dano says the yield curve suggests crash is coming. Yeah, exactly. And even the oil market too. Think about it. The oil market, like I said on yesterday's video, that is not showing good times ahead. I mean, even with the OPEC production cuts and everything that they've done, you've still got oil heading back down to the same price it was before they did all those cuts. So, and the China reopening has been largely a total nothing burger, even though everybody thought that was going to be the new bull market. I remember hearing, Wealthion's a decent podcast. They have a lot of different people on there, and you'll obviously get people you disagree with and agree with and whatever. And a lot of people were coming on that podcast, I remember, and saying, yeah, when the China reopens, everything's going to be, bullish. And that happened, and the China reopening has been a massive flop, so the Chinese economy is really, really weak. And picture this, because in 2008, when the financial collapse happened, the Chinese kind of stepped in and they kind of supplied all these cheap goods now to the global economy, and that kind of helped things. It helped get things going again, but that's not going to happen this time. It could even get even worse, but we won't even go into the whole Taiwan situation, because if that kicks off, I mean, inflation could skyrocket. You could have all kinds of trade blocks. I mean, complete nightmare. So, all right, let's see what else we got. Hey, Cowson, you're in there, buddy. Nice to see you. Peter Schiff's recent tweet compared the 2008 financial crisis, where the media actually called out, unlike in 2023, where the MSM refuses to call out what is happening. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because the Fed especially has said, like, oh, we look at this. Like they said we look at the yield curve ages ago, and then they said we look at the near-term forward spread, and now they're just like, yeah, we don't look at any of that. We just look at unemployment now. So I think it's quite obvious that the government is really putting the pressure on central banks with the raising rates, and they're kind of being pushed to the forefront as everybody can point their pitchforks towards the central bank, because the government doesn't want to take the heat on it, even though it was them who caused most of the inflation. I mean, when I think of my definition of money printing, I really think of government deficit spending. It's not QE isn't really money printing. That doesn't really impact the money supply. It's really government deficit spending. And we saw a lot of government deficit spending, and that caused massive amounts of stimulus. They were able to put out massive amounts of stimulus into the economy. All these new dollars, no new goods or services, though. In fact, less. So what would you expect to happen when that happens? Inflation. And that's exactly what we saw. The question really is, are they going to do that again? And I sincerely hope not, but I fear that they might, even if it's not in as such a massive way as they did in 2020. I feel like they might. I mean, I could just see that complete clown, Chrystia Freeland, coming out and saying, the Canada wage subsidy and the Canada emergency response benefit worked extremely well during 2020 in preventing unemployment, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to do it again. We're going to do it again. Inflation skyrockets as a result of that. But in reality, even though, Canada might do that, Canada it is really kind of irrelevant because it was the US stimulus boom that really caused a lot of the inflation in Canada because they, even though Canada did exactly the same thing essentially, it was really the demand side from the US that caused the massive inflation. So it's really, we got to keep our eye on the US to see if the inflation is coming. Because just if Canada does it on its own, which I don't think they would do, I think they would actually follow the US because in a lot of cases, that's what they're doing. They're like Canada will just follow the US for a lot of things, especially the central banks, even though they don't go as high necessarily. They're following them raising rates. They'll follow them cutting rates. The Bank of Canada has done that for a long time. In my opinion, that's been one of their downfalls, the fact that they did that. I mean, they shouldn't have really done that in 2008 to the extent they did and held it there for so long. And they shouldn't have cut rates in 2015, I believe it was, or 2016 and held it there so long either. So, I think interest rates have just been way too low for too long in Canada. And that's what's caused a lot of the problems that we see today. Low interest rates aren't really a good thing long term. So, Alessandro, Vic, nice to see you in here. As Milton Friedman stated, neither the consumer or the producer can create inflation, only the government can create inflation. Yeah, 100% agree with that. This was government created inflation. QE was not. A lot of people, when they hear QE, they think that is going to be what's going to cause inflation. I think I think we'll see QE probably again. So if Notley wins, Trudeau will own Alberta. Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. It would be another World Economic Forum type in charge, just, parading around saying they're doing everything. We care about you. We really care about you. Just look at the lines at the food bank right now. I mean, just insane. Okay, so somebody says here, de-dollarization and decoupling of many nations, including ones in OPEC plus BRICS, getting stronger will be the last blow to the US and the vassal state of Canada. It's the end of warmongering US Inc. So, yeah, I mean, the de-dollarization, I think that's definitely happening. Nobody can argue against that, but it's the speed that it's happening that I think a lot of people probably think it's happening a lot faster than it actually is happening. I mean, the thing is, which is kind of funny, is the global reserve currency status of the US, like the US dollar being the global reserve currency. It wasn't really chosen by anybody like, Joe Biden coming out and saying, we're now the global reserve currency. It was actually chosen by the free market. It was chosen by countries actually wanting to transact in that currency. And, when you think about the US, they do a load of bad. There is no denying they do a ton of bad. And they also do some good. They also, and obviously they're doing that for some sort of benefit of their own. When you talk about the warmongering US Incorporated, I think you're talking about the US military industrial complex. Obviously, they're doing that for some benefit, but really, in the country's eyes, the US is coming in and they're helping them. So the US is like the savior in their eyes. And you've got to think, like, I actually wrote this down because I knew that we'd probably get onto this topic at some point. But the United States has military bases in 85 countries, compared to Russia has 10 military bases, and they're mostly just around Russia, like in places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and all these other places. They're not like as spread out as the US. And then China has 2 military bases outside of its country. So when you think about the power as well, I mean, the US, think about it. It's not just going to roll over and it's not just going to roll over and lose reserve currency status. Unfortunately, there will likely be a war because that's how it's always been in the past. And whoever comes out the best from that war will likely be the new reserve currency. And if that's China, you got to ask yourself the question, would you want China to be the reserve currency? I mean, they're even worse than the US. I mean, they're even worse than Canada. They're worse than the US. They literally have social credit scoring right now. So I'm not so sure that we want to see massive influence from China. But, de-dollarization is happening, definitely. But it's going to be a very, very slow process. I mean, you've still got some massive economies around the world. You've got massive economies. The EU, the UK, the US is basically the biggest economy in the world. You could argue it with China, but it's really the US. And those economies, they're not just going to suddenly turn around and choose to transact in Chinese yuan. They're going to want dollars. And, you're not going to see the US's allies turn against the US and say, we're joining BRICS and we're taking on their reserve currency. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think de-dollarization will happen. I just don't think it will be as fast as some like to spin it into different things. But that's just me. I might be wrong on that. So we'll see. Calgary and Edmonton, smart 15-minute cities. If you haven't seen the 15-minute city, and I think it was Oxford Council that put that out. Oh my gosh, you've got to see it. It is, you wouldn't believe it was real. I mean, a lot online, the mainstream media especially has been peddling it, saying it's conspiracy theories. But no, it's actually happening in certain places. It just pisses me off so much when everything's a conspiracy theory until it happens, of course. So yeah. I moved to from Minneapolis to Portland, now looking for an exit. Yeah, I've heard Portland is like a zombie town like Vancouver. I saw that, Vancouver is just a crazy place right now. I saw those places selling, like literally selling drugs. Like there's like a store that people can go to now in Vancouver. I saw that. Just crazy. I'm just going to see what else is going on. Did you see what Airbnb is trying to do? Did you see what Airbnb is trying to do to make rentals more affordable, renting rooms? Yeah, I mean, they're going to probably do that for more money, I'm guessing. But the thing is, you have to think about what happens during a recession is you just get consolidations of households. So that leads to less demand in the rental market, less demand in the housing market. I think that could be more severe in this environment than in 2008, because now you've got more people where, in 2008, people would have been like, they wouldn't have wanted as much, like moving home would just not even be an option, even if they lost their job. Whereas now, I think a lot of people do kind of rely on their parents more because times have got so tough. A lot of people say, oh, this is just millennials. They spend money on Starbucks and all this other complete horse shit. I don't agree with that. I think times are really, really tough on people. I mean, wages just aren't where they need to be. And you'll see household consolidation happening even more severely than it happened during the global financial crisis in 2008 because of that. And I think that will get worse as time goes on because people are getting more and more dependent on their parents. I mean, look at it right now with people getting down payments off their parents. They wouldn't be able, a lot of people wouldn't be able to get a home without their parents. It's just that simple. So, just emigrated from the UK. If you think Canada is going down the tubes, I promise it's a heck of a lot worse in England. Yeah, I would agree with you there. I'm going back there in at the end of this week. So yeah, it is just a joke. It is an absolute joke right now. And this, you think the strikes are bad here? Oh my God, it's just a total disaster there. Everything is. And I keep telling my parents and my girlfriend's parents, get the hell out of there. Just get the hell out of there. Go to Panama. Go to Panama where there's lots of people that are retiring. Go to a place like that. Don't stick in England. But, you know, some people are just really stuck in their ways. There's nothing that you're going to be able to say to convince them. And as much as I love them, nothing I say I know will convince them because they just got their roots just stuck down. Their emotional ties are there. And I find that sad in a way, you know. I think that's what happens when you move countries because I came from the UK to Canada. Like you have no attachment anymore to the country that you live in. So you really see it for the advantages and the disadvantages that it brings. And then, you know, if those disadvantages are what outweighing the advantages, you're going to look for another country to move to that's better than that. You're going to look to better yourself. And I think, you know, moving forward, you can't look at any country and say, I'm going to live there for the next 10, 20 years, because you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, who knows? So it's just kind of crazy. You have to date the country essentially in today's world because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you can move to Mexico and then they just have some dictator who gets elected and or a World Economic Forum type who is completely insane. You just don't know. TD just bought up First Horizon. I heard that that deal fell through. That's why their shares tanked today. So I saw that that deal was off. But TD is having to pay, I think they may have to pay like, well, that's if First Horizon doesn't go bankrupt before then. I mean, probably that's what they thought. They probably thought, well, they're probably going to go bankrupt before they even have a chance to sue us. But I'm not sure even if they have to get sued for that. Because it was in the contract, I believe, that they have to pay something ridiculous like $300 million to get out of that deal. But I heard the deal's off, so that's why the shares were tanking for First Horizon this morning. All right. Oil will drop to about $40 due to lack of demand when demand gets crushed. Yeah, you're probably right about that. Just going down the comments, seeing what everyone's talking about. Thoughts on real estate income properties with positive cash flow in Saskatchewan? I mean, if something has positive cash flow, it's how much money you're putting down, obviously. Like if you're putting 50% down, you could go and put that in treasuries right now and get like 5%. So, yeah, I don't know. It depends how much it's cash flowing and how much you're having to put into that. So, and what will happen to real estate there? I mean, I don't think it's going to go down as much as places like Ontario or BC by any stretch of the imagination because it hasn't got so out of hand with the valuations. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. I mean, like for me, I've seen a lot of positive cash flow and properties in the US, and I've been thinking, wow, like, but the thing is, I'm just not emotional. Like, I don't feel, a lot of people feel this need, like they need to get into real estate right now, and I just do not feel that need. I think, when we enter a recession, I'll just get into real estate then. I'm just going to wait until then. I'm not going to ever buy a place in Canada. With the way politics is going and how corrupt this country is, there is no way. I mean, I know the US is bad, but Canada just ignores the Constitution. At least in the US, people stand up when they, try and violate the Constitution. Here in Canada, people just sit back and listen to mainstream news and think that that's the reality. It just kind of baffles me, but I'm never going to buy a property in Canada, that's for sure. And I don't want to have to deal with the tax implications of that either, because they're going to tax the shit out of real estate over the next 10, 20 years. They're going to have to pay for all the money that they've recklessly spent during this pandemic. So, home equity taxes, it's just a matter of time. I literally tweeted that out the other day. It's coming. And you know what? You've also got to think just politically as well. You're now getting more and more voters come to age who want to see reform in housing, who essentially want housing prices to come down. So, long term, the future of the Canadian housing market, in my opinion, just doesn't look good. And the economy is so dependent on housing too. And, one thing that really gets me is like, Canada could be a commodity powerhouse. I mean, there's literally every type of commodity imaginable. The country's absolutely massive. The technology's there now with carbon capture and everything to do this properly. But it's just people have been brainwashed so bad, and it's just such a country that's been pulled apart politically, I think. I really think that's the main struggle that Canada has. Like, the East Coast is like left wing. You've got the middle ground, which is more conservative. You've got BC, which is just like a wild card. And it's just so bifurcated. It just really is. And the federal government, they're responsible for a lot of things. And we keep getting these complete whack jobs voted in. And even though I like Pierre Poilievre, I think, he's hopefully going to win the next general election. Hopefully, but who knows? But even he keeps talking about housing, like we're going to build all these homes and, again, just not dealing with the problems of what's actually happening in the housing market, which is just the rampant speculation that's happened, the lending, the CMHC, all these different components. No, we're just going to build tons of homes and make the economy even more based around the housing market. And obviously he has plans to do more for the energy industry and for commodities and everything like that. But, I don't think he'll probably have enough time to do that, because think about the timing. If he gets elected, then he's probably going to be in power for 5 years, because it will be a recession and people will be moaning that they want massive amounts of stimulus like they had in 2020, that they vote in a complete whack job again straight after him. That is a likely scenario, in my opinion. I think if Quebec separated from Canada, then you'd likely see Alberta try and separate from Canada anyway as well. But then again, if the NDP gets voted again, I think that's a clear vote that most Albertans, well, not most Albertans, but at least it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to be allowed to happen. So, and that's obviously what they would want. BRICS will create a global currency. Yeah, we've been through that. They will, but how are they going to get people to use it? Are they going to force people to use it? They certainly haven't got the military capacity to force people to use it. whereas the US has that military capacity right now. It's like I said, with the bases everywhere, with the fact that they're the peacekeepers in a lot of countries. So yeah, the BRICS is going around. They're doing these deals. They'll probably bring forward this reserve currency, but it's whether anybody actually takes it. It's whether anybody actually wants to use it. That's what's mad, and it probably will be used for some stuff. But when people think of the US dollar, they forget that the US dollar, there's like the domestic money supply in the US, and then there's the euro dollar system, which was created by the free market, which even the Fed doesn't understand, and nobody truly knows how it came into existence. But the euro dollar system came into existence as a solution for Triffin's paradox, which was essentially the world wanted more dollars, but the government wouldn't give it them. So that's how the euro, that was Triffin's paradox, and that's how the euro dollar system came into existence. And people are still borrowing tons of dollars, like taking out dollar denominated loans. Now you could say, okay, they're going to default on all those loans. Well, okay, but then are the BRICS nations going to come in and say, okay, you just defaulted on all your loans. You look like a terrible person to lend money to, but we're going to lend money to you. I mean, it's going to happen. I totally agree with it. I don't think it's happening like tomorrow or next year, like a lot of people like to insinuate. And that's been going on for a long time, guys. These headlines about the dollar dying have been going on for a long time. I mean, people may have forgotten, but this happened in 2020. I mean, I know it's kind of funny because I think a lot of people became interested in finance after 2020. Which is fine, but in 2020 you had a lot of headlines coming out. The dollar is dead. The dollar's going to die. The Fed is printing all this money. And then what happened last year? The dollar index absolutely exploded, and still right now it's at 100. It's still just holding 100, refusing to go below that. Probably will now I've said it. But anyways, I think it will happen. It's just going to take a long, long time to happen. And it's not something that I would bet on or even consider like allocating money towards in my portfolio right now. But then again, I do hold gold. Like I hold a substantial amount of gold, like 15-20%, between 15 and 20%, I think, around that number. And so I mean, gold is the play, I guess, if you want insurance against something like that happen, because in that scenario, the US dollar's gone. So are all the currencies that are attached to it. So that's the euro, that's the Canadian dollar, and likely those would fall first. Not the dollar falls first and then all those dominoes fall down. It would likely be the other way round. That's how that would work. So and that's kind of how we saw it play out last year, and how I think we'll see it playing out in the future. The dollar will be rising, and all these other currencies will be starting to fail, and that will incentivize people to look around for other solutions to that, and the de-dollarization to continue and continue and continue, but by no means happen like next year or anything like that. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Just moved from Toronto to Rochester, New York, 1.5 hours south of Toronto. My down payment in Toronto just bought me a 4-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot. Hilarious. Not hilarious. That's freaking great. Congratulations to you for just getting out of Canada and, not being a slave to your debts here like so many people are, and continue to want to get into that. So I think that's a great thing. If people, there are a lot of people in Canada that probably, and they probably are, to be honest, and a lot of those are the people that are probably smart enough and thinking, oh, let's move to Mexico, let's move to someplace in Europe. I know Marco, shout out to you if you're watching this. He moved to Europe. He sold his house for an insane amount of money in Kitchener-Waterloo area, and then moved back to Europe. And he's just loving life, like absolutely loving life. And that's really how you profit off essentially this debt Ponzi scheme that we have happening. And as more and more people realize that as well, it's like a rush for the exits that could happen, but I don't think it would happen because of that, because people just don't want to move. They're too comfortable. It's like I said, they get their roots just sunk real far in and they don't want to move. Although I think a lot of people in Canada are more open because the country's so large. It's more common for people to move, and moving across Canada is like moving to a different country anyway. So, plan on leaving Canada, moving to Australia, just as messed up but as Canada, but at least the weather's good. Yeah, you share my view on the weather. I mean, I don't know where you are in Canada, but the weather in Calgary is horrific in the winter, and then we get the smoke in the summer. You just can't win, it seems. And I love spending time outdoors, and when it's smoky, I'm like, damn, I don't want to do that. I hiked up a mountain when it was smoky, and the damage that probably did to my lungs felt like glass after that. And then after that, I was like, nah, I'm never going out in that smoke again. I'll stay indoors. But what type of life is that to live? And then in the winter as well, you're barely getting any vitamin D. You're stuck inside for at least 4 weeks of winter. It's minus 30. The snow never gets off the ground. And yeah, anyways, the weather is just, at least we get sun. That's what people cling to in Alberta and say. But I spend a lot of time outdoors, even when it's like negative 20. I try and get out, and I never see any of those people around. It's just me. Everybody else is stuck indoor. But I mean, looking at the sun out the window, what kind of life is that? Positive cash flow in Saskatchewan is growing wheat. Oh, Vic, you're making me laugh. All right, James G. Thanks so much, buddy, for the super chat. Malaysia, Singapore, UAE, Switzerland, and Monaco are options for investors and entrepreneurs. How do you rank these places? Have you been to any? No, I have. I've been to Switzerland. I haven't been to Monaco. Malaysia, no. Singapore, no. UAE, no. I know a lot of people that live in the UAE and absolutely love it. I've heard some people that don't live there and have visited, and they have a different view. But I think it depends on what you're doing and stuff. I think the UAE is one of the kindest places to entrepreneurs. It's a place that's actually attracting entrepreneurs, whereas a place like Canada is like discouraging entrepreneurs. It's not a place that's friendly for entrepreneurs at all. And then Monaco, I mean, that is incredibly, incredibly expensive. I think it's one of the most expensive places in the world to live anyway. But obviously you could live in France if you have an EU passport, but then I don't think you'd be able to take advantage of the tax advantages that you'd have in Monaco. So yeah, Monaco, I wouldn't say that's so great. Switzerland, I don't really like Switzerland because that's where the World Economic Forum is. And I can only imagine the influence that they have over the Swiss government. I think the Swiss government used to be more neutral, but not so much anymore. I've visited Switzerland. Switzerland's expensive. However, people get paid a lot of money there. The average wages there are very high. What people earn is actually a lot. And when you actually take that into context, when you look at the prices there, even though they're expensive to us visiting there, to actually the locals, it's not bad at all. And they're surrounded by European countries, and they got the rail network and everything like that. So, UAE. Malaysia, I think, is a great place. I really do think Malaysia is a great place. It's got a very low cost of living. I really want to visit there, actually, because I think that could be a potentially amazing place to go and move to. And I've heard Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist talk about that place. I believe he's got a place there as well, a lot. And I've also seen many, many videos done on that on Malaysia as well. It's low cost of living. They speak good English there because I think it was part of the British colonies at some stage or something like that. But anyway, the English is spoken like very well there. You don't need to learn the local language there at all. So that's a benefit. And it's also very cheap. Like the cost of living is extremely cheap. I mean, I was looking actually about 3 weeks ago, and you can buy like a real nice apartment in Kuala Lumpur for I think it was like $100,000 US, and that's just insane. I mean, imagine buying that. That in Singapore would cost you an absolute fortune. And did you also say Singapore? Oh yeah, you did say Singapore. Yeah, Singapore again, expensive and kind of authoritarian government. So yeah, BC has the lowest property tax in Canada and the USA. Thanks again for that super chat, James G. I did not know that. I did not know that. I know like Alberta's property taxes seem high compared to the ones in Ontario. That's for sure. I don't know if a lot of people take that into account, especially if you like Calgary is, well, on the Alberta scale anyway, for property taxes, Calgary is pretty low. But if you look at some of the commuter cities around, oh my God, the property taxes are just insane, like $6,000-$7,000. So kind of crazy. Will Trudeau be signing in the lounge tonight at his $6,000 a night hotel? Guesses on what he will be signing. Oh my God. I don't even want to guess that. I don't even want to go there. His actions just infuriate me. He's an absolute coward and corrupt too. We know he's completely corrupt, and we know his party's corrupt, and it's all out there. And I don't know, still a lot of people will probably vote for him in the next election. I just moved to Russia from Canada. It's great here. Just bought a nice log house with a yard for about 50,000 Canadian. I mean, that's like going from one extreme to the other, from this type of corrupt to that type of corrupt. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in Russia, but yeah, that's interesting. I suppose there's a lot of wilderness out there and probably less red tape on it, unlike Canada, where, you know, you got to inform the government every move you make. Why is that? In Texas, people run to... Oh, that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, I mean, this is my thoughts exactly. Like, if somebody had owned their house outright right now, like, just sell that thing, get the hell out of Canada. You know, you can make that work easily, in my opinion. Like Rick says right here, yeah, you don't have to be a scientist or a brain surgeon to do that. And Ontario is located to places where you can actually buy a lot of good cash flowing properties in the US. New York's a good place. Trying to think something that me and Scott Walters were discussing this the other day, because he does this thing where he's trying to pencil out, where he's like penciling out properties. I think it's a really good exercise that everyone should do to see what the rent range is for the house versus the carry costs. And I've done a similar video like this out at a development in Calgary too. But you know, it's kind of crazy. I managed to find a property that was like 20% RV ratio. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. Yeah, I don't think you can be loyal to Canada anymore with this type of government in charge. I just don't. I mean, you have to break free and leave. I mean, even if you love the country. I mean, I love the country. I love the people, but not enough people are going to wake up. Not enough people are going to wake up across the country that it'll make a difference. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality. The only way is to boycott the country, which is to leave and throw it in the rearview mirror. And maybe come back at a later date. I mean, I'll certainly be coming back all the time, but probably not to live. I didn't leave. I'm going to stand with my country, and I came to Alberta. I hope the NDP doesn't get it. I really hope for you that the NDP doesn't get in. But I wish you the best of luck. And yeah, I mean, if you can deal with the terrible winters here, you'll probably do okay. You'll probably do okay. I mean, the cost of living is also skyrocketing here as well. That is one thing. Even though, Alberta has lagged everyone else for so long now, like it's catching up like real fast. Whereas the other places are probably going to start to go the other way at some point, and Alberta will actually be going back. I didn't even write any chapters now. I think I'm caught up. I got to the top. Do you think there's a chance AB will be separated from Canada? Yeah, I think there's a chance of that. But then again, if I think the chance of that has been reduced significantly if the NDP gets voted in this next election in Alberta. I think the chances of that are going to be slim over the next 10, 20 years. I think if they do get voted in, that could become more likely, definitely. Again, I don't think that's a quick thing that's going to happen. I don't think it would start with Alberta either. I think you would see like Quebec separate, which if you think about it, could happen if the Conservatives get voted in the next general election. That could mean Quebec then go and want to separate or whatever. That could definitely happen. They're definitely getting more and more authoritarian there about what they want to do. I mean, it's just a mad land in my opinion. But anyway, if Quebec separate, and just imagine, when we're talking about this, these are some massive economic risks for Canada because, even if Alberta separates or Quebec separates, that would have massive consequences for Canada's economy. Huge consequences. And the global elite would do their best to try and stop that happening by, putting the most pain possible in place. I mean, look at the UK with Brexit and how long that was dragged out, and it just went on and on and on and on and on. And then by the end of it, because it took so long, you ended up with kind of not even a Brexit. That didn't really happen. What they should have just done is just left really quickly, and then everything would have had to catch up in between, even though that would have caused a lot of economic turmoil in the short term. Long term, it would have been better instead of just like, going back and forth for 2-3 years, pandering to all the rules they want and everything like that. So yeah, it's just some risks to the future there, but all right. And I think that's it. So I don't know if that was a good live stream. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. But I want to thank you so much for supporting the channel and being here tonight. It's always an honor to do these type of things, have these type of discussions. I don't rate myself as any kind of expert by any stretch of the imagination. I do these things because you guys enjoy them. They're enjoyable for me to do as well. It's a great way to interact with you. And if you want to see more of these going forward, I never ask you to do this, but hit the like button so that I know. And I will see you in the next one, guys. Take care of yourselves. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.